Muy buenas tardes, Don Mauro. Hello, everybody. What an absolute pleasure to have my friend and colleague Mauro Guillén with us today. Mauro, as I think you will all see in a minute, is just an extraordinary individual with an incredible perspective of what's happening in the world. Like me, he grew up in Spain. In fact, he did his undergraduate in Spain, and like me, he came to the U.S. for graduate school to Yale University for his PhD, and then he has taught at MIT in the Sloan School, but ultimately he landed at Wharton, where he has had an impressive career, including, by the way, his service as the head of the Lauder Institute of International Business, which was a sort of a perfect fit given his global profile and his global interest. He has written amazing pieces on the global economy, which I think he has exposed him to really all sorts of perspectives from what's happening in the globe, and he has a whole host of interests, including, by the way, he has a piece that he wrote. He loves architecture and many other things. I mean, anyway, he's an incredibly eclectic intellectual with an incredible perspective about a whole host of things. And I had no idea that he was working on this project. And when I saw it, he's like, oh my gosh, I need to get my hands on it. And sure enough, he was kind enough to send me a copy, and I've loved it. The book is 2030. The subtitle is How Today's Biggest Trends Will Collide and Reshape the Future of Everything. Now, all of my colleagues at Georgia Tech know that we just went through a process of strategic planning during my first year or so back at Georgia Tech, which was very interesting because our timeline is 2030. So I was a little bit concerned about inviting you, Mauro, and not sure that all of a sudden maybe once we discuss your predictions for the future, we may need to go back and change our strategic plan. Hopefully not. But anyway, so I'm gonna. This is gonna be a very informal conversation. I really appreciate your time with us. I'll ask you a few questions about the book, but if you don't mind, I'll keep pushing to maybe sort of get to how does that affect higher education, given that obviously that is an industry of great importance for all of us. But love the book, and I know, of course, as a sociologist, you start with. You have identified a number of trends, and one of them has to do with demography, right? Which I guess is the most accurate of the social sciences in terms of its capacity to predict the future. And one of the first trends that you indicate is this idea of fewer babies. How the population growth. Even though we're still growing, and I guess we now have surpassed 8 billion, but it's sort of slowing down virtually all over the world, except for Africa, where the train has left the station. So help us understand, why this matters so much. If we're sitting here in Philadelphia or Atlanta, why should we care about this demographic explosion in Africa?
Yeah, thank you, Angel, for inviting me for this event. It's really an honor, and I wished I could be in Atlanta today with you and with all of the participants. But I'm here in Philadelphia in my basement at home, and of course, it's really great to be able to use this technology that we have nowadays to essentially engage in what I'm sure is going to be a very intellectual conversation here about what's going on in the world and how the future will be shaped. So you were referring to demographic trends, and the fact that, and this is the first important trend here, is that as time goes by, we're having fewer and fewer babies. That makes a big difference 10 years down the road, 20 years down the road, because if every generation is smaller than the preceding generation, that makes for a very different dynamic. And of course, I'm sure in a moment you're going to ask me also about life expectancy, the fact that we're living longer and longer as time goes by, because it is in the combination of those two things that we're going to see all of these massive changes. But if we stay with the number of babies being born, so the fertility rate over the lifetime of a woman, what's the average number of children, Well, we have really big parts of the world where the number is less than 2, meaning we are below replacement. And that's obviously the case in Japan, in China, in South Korea, in Europe, Russia, but also here in the United States and in Canada, Australia. Now, in Africa, you said you put it really well. In Africa, the population is still expanding because they're having on average 4.2, 4.3 children per woman as we speak. But I should also point out that that number is also dropping in Africa, but it's dropping from a very, very high level. But just to put things in more simple terms, when you and I were born in Spain, right, back in the 60s, well, in India, the average woman would have 6 to 7 children. And today it's 2.3, right, which is very close to the replacement level. And quite frankly, if somebody had asked me when I was in school in Spain in the 1970s, whether during my lifetime that would happen in India, I would have told you, no way, right? No way India is going to be at a level of 2.3 children per woman in terms of the fertility rate. And the implications, why does this matter? Well, consumer markets, financial markets, they all depend on not just the number of people, but also the age of people, right? Because we exhibit a very different pattern of consumption and also savings and investing behavior as we go through the different stages in life. And of course, we can also discuss the implications for politics. We can discuss the implications for geopolitics, for the balance of geopolitical power in the world. At the end of the day, I'm not going to argue that demography is destiny, you know, that famous phrase. But everything at the end of the day depends on demography. The thing is that there are ways in which demography or demographic trends can change. And I'm sure we're going to get into that. So it's destiny up to a point, because we can also change some background factors so that demographic trends also take a turn one way or the other.
So before we move to other trends, if we again bring it back to our business, higher education, universities, right? I mean, the U.S. Attracts about 1 million foreign students every year. They bring billions of dollars to the economy, and very importantly, of course, they bring talent, which, as you know, and as you discuss in the book, that much of that talent then leads to some of the most successful enterprises in America. This talent feels well, and you and I are slightly biased because we're both immigrants, so we belong to that group. But for the first time in decades, the number of foreign students has declined coming into the U.S. at a time where, if we look at these trends, is like we better find ways to start finding students outside of the United States, because the overall market right here at home is only going to be either flat at best, if not shrinking. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, I would make 3 very quick points. The first is, you're absolutely right. I mean, higher education is a major industry that generates, you know, both direct and indirect jobs, and makes such a big contribution to the balance of payments of the U.S. I actually went back to calculate this. And in the service sector in the U.S., the biggest surplus that the country has is in financial services, okay? And the second biggest surplus is in higher education.
Is that right?
Yes, in the I'm happy to send you the numbers on that, but it's really impressive. So you're right. I mean, as I said earlier, every generation that is now born is smaller than the preceding one. So there's fewer people, right? Unless we increase the proportion of people who go to college, right? But it's already rather high. Well, we're going to see that domestically, there's going to be smaller and smaller age cohorts approaching college age, right? This is very clear. Now, at the same time, there is huge demand from abroad, right? In terms of education, especially those parts of the world, South Asia, the Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa, where the number of young people continues to expand. Because once again, remember, in Africa, for every woman, we will have 4.5 babies being born on average, right? So I think it's a matter of reorienting, right? I mean, we're not going to have a lot of students coming from Europe, right? We're not going to have a lot of students coming from other aging countries. But there are very young countries in the world. But then the other thing that I would add, if you allow me, is that at the same time that this is happening, we also see that we're living longer. And not only that, another very important trend is technology is making knowledge obsolete much faster than before. So if instead of living on average 50 years or 60 years, we live 80 or 84 here in the United States, if instead of that, we also see that technology makes whatever we learn when we are 20 or 22, like your typical students at Georgia Tech, If you just do the numbers, then I think it's easy to realize that we're not going to be able to be just in one trade, in one line of work, in one career for our entire life. If our life is going to last so long, and technology is going to make our knowledge obsolete much faster than in the past. So the combination of those two things, I think, means for universities here in this country is that we're going to start to think about lifelong learning. So people coming back to university several times, not just once, right? Or twice, right? When they're very young, first for college and then maybe for a graduate degree. But maybe after 20 years of working, let's say, in chemical engineering, people will realize, oh my goodness, artificial intelligence now, makes it really hard to be a chemical engineer. And again, this is just a hypothetical example. So I need to go back to school when I'm 40, and then maybe acquire knowledge in a different line of business, right? So I think that's going to be the biggest impact for higher education. We need to be, I think, much more flexible than we've been so far, much more creative, and thinking that our customers, so to speak, are no longer just people in their late teens or early 20s or grad students in their mid-20s. I think we have to expand that concept there. And in so doing, I think we're going to have much more demand than in the past.
That's very interesting. By the way, you might find these numbers a compelling sort of case of what you're projecting into the future. So Georgia Tech, 5 years ago, and this is before me, so I'm not even, this is not a personal brag, but it's maybe an institutional brag. We ran this grand experiment of trying to produce a Master's of Science in Computer Science that was done entirely online at a fraction of the cost of coming for a normal degree at Georgia Tech. You can do the Georgia Tech, top-ranked computer science master's for less than $7,000. It is now the largest Master's of Science in the galaxy. It is like approaching, I think now 12,000 students. We launched another one in data analytics and another one in cybersecurity. Together, those three programs now are 16,000 students. It's a third, actually over a third of the enrollment at Georgia Tech. People don't realize that. So even if we didn't necessarily maybe predict the trend, we didn't think it was going to be that huge. But I guess our experience basically supports what you're just predicting. And this is these are mid-career folks, right? It's not even
we have another a similar experience, but a very, very small scale here at the University of Pennsylvania that we launched a couple of years ago, the BA, so the basic undergraduate degree, entirely online for people who could not go to school when they were teenagers, right? And it's very small scale, only 100 students because we're experimenting with it. But I think that's the future. I mean, the future is to, again, think about other kinds of students, think about other stages in life, think about the career switchers, right? Not just the people who don't know what they're going to do. Well, they're interested maybe in technology, so they go to Georgia Tech, and they haven't really worked before because they went there straight from high school. So I think that we need to diversify our audience, I think, if we want to remain relevant also, because I think the economy is evolving in ways that essentially make it very difficult for somebody to be in the same line of business or work for 50 years with just 4 years of education, right, at the university level.
I'm curious, was there a mutiny among alumni when that online master's was announced?
Well, I'm not sure about alumni, but I can tell you that there was quite a bit of skepticism on the part of the faculty. So I teach in that program. I have a class that I teach. In fact, later on today, in a couple of hours, I have my weekly office hours with them. And it's, you know this better than I do. I mean, it's quite astonishing the extent to which we, the faculty, I mean, I am a faculty member, obviously, sometimes we don't want to change, right? And obviously, without the faculty, you cannot change the university. So yes, a lot of skepticism among faculty members. And I hear also noises from alums. It's like, hey, I mean, this is kind of undermining the value of my degree, right?
Right. Yeah, we're familiar with those. So we'll come back to this because I'm very interested to see. We'll come back to the idea of what happens in higher ed after COVID. But before that, and before we move away from demographics, you have an interesting discussion in the book about immigration. And by the way, immigration you put the numbers. I mean, it's not going to solve. Immigration is not big enough to solve the population imbalance between, but it's going to be an important mechanism to satisfy the needs for talent and workforce in places like the United States. And yet, it is always such a politically loaded idea of allowing more people in one's country. Tell me a little bit about what you have found. I mean, given all the value that quantitatively and objectively immigration brings to a country like the U.S., and still we always react against it.
Yeah, well, as you know, historically here in the United States, we've always gone through ups and downs in terms of both the number of immigrants coming in and the attitudes, right, towards immigration. But right now, I think we're at a low point in the sense that there's a lot of political backlash against immigration. I think a lot of it has to do with the stagnation of the middle class, quite frankly. So I think to the extent that the middle class in the United States has not been expanding in terms of numbers and also in terms of the average income, then people feel threatened by people who come from abroad. But the benefits of immigration are all over us, right? So number one, most immigrants tend to be in their 20s or 30s, contrary to the popular myth. So they tend to be people who work as opposed to people and pay taxes or make contributions as opposed to people who claim benefits from government services, right? So they make a net fiscal contribution to the government at all levels, local, state, and national. That's one big benefit. The other big benefit is that it helps rebalance the age structure in terms of the viability of the social security system. So as I think everybody knows, by the year 2029 now, the trustees of Social Security here in the United States say that the key financial ratio will fall below 1, which means that the system will not be viable. So if you have more younger people who don't claim as many benefits, but at the same time work and make contributions, then you can rebalance that. And then the third thing is entrepreneurship. Georgia Tech is a big place for entrepreneurs. Look, from the proverbial dry cleaner or restaurant, pizza restaurant, all the way up to the high-tech startup, immigrants play a disproportionate role here in the United States. I mean, you can name, companies such as Tesla or Google, founded or co-founded by foreigners, right? But you see, among the companies valued at $1 billion or more, the unicorns, nearly 40% have been founded or co-founded here in the United States by immigrants, right? So their contribution to entrepreneurship is really important. And I would like people to think about the following. Migration itself is an act of entrepreneurship, right? Because you have to take the initiative. You have to leave your culture behind and go to another country. And therefore, I think it should come as no surprise that immigrants are more entrepreneurial when it comes to the economy, right? And the benefits are, all over the place. And once again, immigrants are job creators. Again, the conventional wisdom now, because of this political backlash, is that immigrants come here to steal jobs away. And that's not true, right? They're mainly job creators.
That is fascinating. So I guess one of the I don't know if looking into your crystal ball, we can predict whether countries will come to terms with that and really will open up. I mean, we always compare ourselves with Canada, where right now with current regulations, if you get a degree from a certain college, almost you automatically get your green card stapled to your diploma, right? We welcome you here. I guess something that is unthinkable in the U.S. I mean, do you think there would be sort of I don't know if it's a race to the bottom or probably no, or race to the top, a competition for immigrant talent in the world, or is that too naive?
Well, I think there's definitely competition for highly qualified talent, right? Immigration. And as you just pointed out, Canada has been playing very strong in that terrain. It's getting interesting now because China is also trying to participate in that kind of a trend. Unfortunately here, for political reasons in the United States, I think we're falling behind. It's very difficult, as you know, to predict politics. And once again, we've gone over recent decades here in the United States through ups and downs in terms of immigration. So if history is of any guide, the cycles, right, are about 20, 25 to 30 years, right? So right now, I think we're at a low when the attitudes against immigration are quite widely shared among, at least I would say, half of the American public, right? But if history is of any guide, I think, in the next 5, 10, 15 years, the trend will be just the opposite. And we will probably, enter another period in which most people in the United States will understand the benefits of migration, and policies will be, I think, more open to immigration.
So another trend you talk about, and you foreshadowed it earlier, was you call it "Gray is the New Black." I love that title of that chapter. Right, we're getting older. Our societies are getting older, and you're thinking, well, that should start giving us ideas about where the business is going to be and what technologies might need to be developed. So thinking about even people at Georgia Tech who are entrepreneurial, who are thinking about, okay, in what area should I start focusing? And you talk about a whole host of technologies that might prove to be very interesting going forward because of that, from even apparel or shoes that are more comfortable to more sophisticated things like more sophisticated technologies, forms of entertainment, all sorts of services. Any again, looking into your crystal ball, areas that should be should captivate the attention of to-be entrepreneurs. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Angel, and I think the evidence is relatively straightforward. Population trends indicate that increasingly we have more people above the age of 60, right? And as a percentage of the population, because remember, we're having fewer babies, so the younger generations are smaller. So much so that for the first time around the year 2030, hence the title of the book, the market segment, the consumer market segment of people above the age of 60 will be the largest in the market. And this has never happened. So this is going to happen first in Japan within the next 2 or 3 years, then in China, then in Western Europe, and finally here in the United States, all of that within the next decade. And this is important because think about entrepreneurs, but not only that, also think about brands, think about established companies. For the last 100 years, they've had the younger consumer, middle-aged consumer in their 20s, 30s as their target. Every product, every service was designed for them. Now that's going to have to change. And let me give you another fact that I think is really important. Here in the United States, 80% of the net worth is owned by people above the age of 60. Average in the world is about 60%, so the U.S. is a little bit of an outlier. And I don't mean to say, of course, that everybody above the age of 60 is rich. There is inequality, as we know, and that's another very, very important trend that I'm sure we'll talk about. But it tells you something about where the purchasing power is. And so in terms of fields of technology, in addition to the ones that you mentioned, I would say robotics is going to be huge. Well, look at the facts once again. A lot of people above the age of 60, 70, 80, 90, at some point they will need care. Many of them will prefer to stay at home, but we won't have enough young people to take care of them. So robotics is going to play a role. And as you know, there's already quite a few experiments here and there using robotics, right? For example, in Denmark, every nursing home for the elderly has a robotic seal that is used as a pet to help dementia patients cope with their problems, right? So robotics is going to be huge. Virtual reality is going to be incredibly important. And then every kind of digital platform that people will be able to use, not just to communicate with their friends or their family members who may be far away, but also to work. I mean, the other thing that I would predict is that much higher proportion of people in their 60s, in their 70s, in their 80s are going to keep on working at least a few hours a week. And they can work remotely, perhaps. And why do I say that? Well, because we're going to have, need for their experience and their skills. But more importantly, because they're going to remain in good or actually excellent mental and physical shape for much longer than the people whom we, called elderly, right? 30 or 40 or 50 years ago. So in other words, what I'm trying to say here is that I think these conceptions that we've been using, these categories of old and young, I think we need to start abandoning them, right? Because demographics is changing that, but also technology is changing that, right? And so I would urge entrepreneurs, graduates from Georgia Tech, focus on that market segment because it's going to be the single most important one. If you come up with some technology solution that helps them, accomplish something that delivers a better quality of life for them, you're going to make a big splash. You're going to be very successful.
That's a very interesting insight. So another chapter of your book, by the way, you did a great job with the titles of the chapters that were.
It's all about marketing, actually.
Yeah, no, you mastered the art. You mastered the art. This keeping up with the Sings and the Wangs. This whole notion that this is already here pretty much, because the biggest share of middle class consumers will no longer be in Western Europe, US, and Japan, but it's going to be basically China and India, right? I mean, that's where the action is. And so again, back when, if you start thinking about as an entrepreneur, as much as we right now, China is normally referred to in geopolitical and competitive terms, actually, we better learn to do business in China, or we're going to miss the biggest opportunity of the century, right? In China and India and these other emerging markets that are growing at such a high pace, right?
Absolutely. So we used to have only one middle class in the world that mattered. That was the European middle class, the American middle class. By now, it's a fourth generation middle class. So most of the people who are middle class in the US or Europe, their parents and their grandparents were also middle class, right? But that middle class is stagnant. The one that is growing both numerically, headcounts, and also in terms of purchasing power is the middle class in emerging markets. And by the way, also in Africa, from a very low level, but the middle class is also growing in Africa. So this is all about then, instead of keeping up with the Joneses, right? The famous saying here in the United States is keeping up with the middle class in India and China. But two very important consequences here, right? One is, well, brands, companies, entrepreneurs, up until now, they've primarily had the American middle class consumer in mind, right? That was the gold standard. What is it that the American middle class consumer wants, right? Can we make it in the US market? And wait until the year 2030. After that, I think most brands and most companies in the world are going to be thinking about the Asian consumer. And by the way, second point that I think is also important, India will eventually be a much bigger middle-class market than China. And people don't believe me when I say this. So the Chinese economy will be bigger, but remember, GDP, gross domestic product, includes investment, includes exports, and also the domestic market. So here I'm talking about the domestic market, and the bulk of that is middle class. Well, India has a younger population than China. And when you compare at the same level of development, the consumer markets of two countries, what really makes the difference is the age of the consumer. Because the age of the consumer drives how many durable goods are purchased and how many cars and homes are purchased. So that's where the difference lies, right? At the same level of development when you compare two countries. So India has a much younger population than China. China, in fact, has one of the oldest populations in the world. Let's not forget about that. And getting old really quickly, approaching Japan, in fact. So India is going to be, by the year maybe 2037, 2038, bigger as a middle-class consumer market than China. But on top of that, you have ASEAN, so Indonesia, Malaysia, Thailand. You have Bangladesh and Sri Lanka. And then you have the Middle East and Sub-Saharan Africa, right? Just 10 seconds, Angel. Why, as you know this better than I do, why are Chinese companies and Chinese government agencies investing so much money in Africa? Well, the easy answer is oil, natural resources, minerals, and so on and so forth. But that's not even the beginning of it. Their biggest strategy is, we know Sub-Saharan Africa is going to be a big consumer market because they have a young population and it's growing, right? And the economies are growing. So we want to position ourselves to be players in that domestic, in that middle-class market in Africa.
That's very interesting. So back to the business of higher education, right? If you put politics aside and social attitudes aside, you would say, how do we prepare ourselves to win in that economy? I would say, keep bringing talent from abroad who can then help you open up those markets, right? So recruit Chinese and Indian students, basically, and students from other places. And number two is make sure American students go abroad, which right now, naturally, by the way, only about, as you know, less than 10% of American students study abroad. We do much better at Georgia Tech, but we're just above 50%. So am I reading this right? I mean, would you?
Absolutely. I mean, so it is a huge opportunity. There is a problem, and I'm going to point out what the problem, as I see it, is. But the opportunity is huge because, look, the middle class is expanding on a global basis, right? Every year we have another 100 to 120 million additional people who are in the middle class. And as you know, one of the most important values of the middle class is education, right? The middle class parents want their children to get the best possible education, including, university or college level education. So that's a big opportunity. For American universities, as you said, maybe we will have excess capacity because we won't have enough people from the US, right, to attract them, right? Now, what's the problem? I think simply put is the cost, right? It's the cost because an American higher education can be afforded by very few people in the United States to begin with without financial aid, let alone, people from India or from the Middle East or from sub-Saharan Africa, right? So cost is going to be really important. And that's where, again, technology comes in, right? So maybe some, innovation in terms of not just purely, just using technology, using online or using virtual learning, but some hybrid model may bring the cost down in such a way that then, for example, American universities can benefit from this enormous demand for higher education that I think is going to come from the emerging middle class in all of those markets around the world. Now, remember, they can satisfy that demand with their own universities, and that's what they're doing. They're expanding their universities, right? But obviously here in the United States, I think we have an advantage, which is the quality of the education, the quality of the research behind it, the beautiful campuses, the facilities, and all of that. But I think we need to make it affordable for that middle class in those parts of the world. That, I think, is the challenge.
Fascinating. All right, let's change to another one of your trends in your crystal ball, which is finally women emerging, claiming their power, their political power, claiming their wealth, exercising a much bigger influence in our society. And by the way, you cite some numbers in the book that were actually even more depressing than I would have guessed in terms of CEOs and female CEOs currently in big companies in the U.S. Are less than 5%, and the U.S. does better than the UK and does better than the EU. And you even cite the fact that in France and Germany, there were, at least at the time of the writing, there were zero women CEOs of large companies. Yeah. And you are predicting that that's going to change dramatically. And of course, as if somehow the karma would have it, we elected our first vice president in the United States since you published the book. How far do you think this trend will go over the next decade, and what qualitative impact it will have in our society? Big question.
A big question. Let me just make an additional point about Kamala Harris. Not only she's the first woman, first African American, she's also the first daughter of immigrants, right?
Oh, that's right.
To reach that office, which is again important, right, for the conversation that we were having earlier. So here's the thing: if you have the number of babies coming down, it's not just because it happens. It's not a random thing. It's mainly driven by the fact that now women in more and more parts of the world have better access to education, right? And the mechanism there, this is really important, is not that they decide not to have babies, but rather that they postpone having their first baby because they stay in school, then they go to college, then they go to grad school, then they want to get promoted at work. And it is postponing the first baby that really drives the number down of babies in the end. So at the end of the day, what we're having here is women accessing education in much greater numbers than before. And that in this type of economy that we have in the world eventually will result, let's see what happens with discrimination, which is still gender-based discrimination, which still is a problem, will result in more and more women being successful in their careers and also in the world of politics, not just in the world of business. And look, Angel, something that I always like to cite, right now as we speak here in the United States, according to the U.S. Bureau of the Census, in 39% of the households where there is a man and a woman married to each other, in 39% of those households, the woman makes more money than the man. When you and I were growing up, I can tell you that was not the situation. Mm-hmm. The projection by the U.S. Bureau of the Census is that by the year 2030, it's the same year, it will be more than 50%. In more than 50% of American households with a married man and women, the woman will make more money than the man.
And what does that mean in how money is utilized and spent, and how decisions?
Well, that's a really important question. And as you know, there's a ton of research on that. Some of it conducted here in the United States, some of it abroad. But we know from pension fund allocations, we know from experiments, we know from many different kinds of studies that women tend to be more risk averse when it comes to managing their money. And by the way, over the long run, that tends to be like a good thing, okay? So they get better performance and returns over the very long run. So it will have an impact on savings, on investing, on financial markets in general. But one caveat though, as women reach, higher levels of success in their careers, they start behaving more like men. And this, as you very well know, as an engineer, is a very good, very well documented phenomenon, convergence to the mean, right? Regression to the mean. Right? So in other words, men and women are different, primarily because in the past, they were doing very different things in life, not because of biology, because, some of them were, the men were working outside of the household, the women were forced to stay in the household. But now that has changed, and there's more women who have the same life experiences as men outside of the household. So expect that there will be regression to the mean, meaning that women will become less risk averse. There will be some kind of convergence. But for the time being, I think we can safely continue to assume that the impact of the fact that women are going to be making their own money, they're going to be saving, they're going to be accumulating wealth, will have a large impact on financial markets. And that's what wealth managers, what the banks tell me all the time, that they're having to change their strategies now that they have more women as customers, women with money, right? They make their own money.
Let's talk about cities. Yeah, you live in Philadelphia, which of course also has undergone a huge transformation in the makeup of its economy. And I'm in Atlanta, which is right now undergoing a very interesting sort of entrepreneurial and tech-led revival. By the way, no coincidence that is happening right around tech. So obviously, I'm an optimist about the role of cities, and of course, there's the whole concept around the creative class and cities as congregators of talent and all that positive side of cities. And yet, cities also sometimes portrayed as having a host of issues around pollution and transportation and crime and safety. And then you throw COVID in the mix, and there are these media reports that all of a sudden people are going to leave the cities and go back to the suburbs or live on top of a mountain and connect with the internet and all that. So do you think this is the end of the city, or there's going to be a constant...
So this is a really important question, I think, Angel. And look, every other trend that we have discussed so far is getting intensified or accelerated by the pandemic, right? So the decline in the number of babies, population aging, the rise of emerging markets, all of those. But you're absolutely right. I mean, there's a question mark as to whether this pandemic will reverse this growth of cities. And it's still too early to tell, but what I read from the experts and my own assessment is that I think that this may happen in Europe and in the United States, that some people will choose not to live as close to the downtown area or even in the downtown area, but rather move out because of social distancing, because of the possibility of working remotely and so on and so forth. But quite frankly, if you look at South Asia, the Middle East, Sub-Saharan Africa, which is where most of the growth in cities is taking place right now, 90% of the growth is in those parts of the world, then I don't think the growth of cities is going to be reversed over there because the cities is still such a big magnet. But as you said, there are two problems with cities. One is inequality. They tend to generate a lot of inequality. And the other one is pollution. And cities, of course, as I mentioned in the book, contribute 80% of the carbon emissions in the world. They occupy only 1% of the land. They're home to about 55% of the population, but they account, because they're very energy intensive, for 80% of the carbon emissions. So unless we fix the cities, unless we make them more efficient and more environmentally friendly, it's going to be very difficult to reverse the problem of climate change.
Got it. All right, let's talk about the sharing economy, which I think you introduced that chapter alluding to John Lennon, Imagine No Possessions, right? This dream that we don't have to own a car. We don't have to own anything. The sharing economy. So I thought that the chapter was gonna be rah-rah. The sharing economy is going to change everything. And by the way, it's going to it's going to be good for sustainability. It's a much better use of resources. Da 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 da. And all of a sudden, I found you're talking about the dark side of the sharing economy, like Uber filling our streets with excess traffic, employment quality dropping, like all these gig economy that all of a sudden is creating a whole bunch of people with just terrible jobs and very little in terms of social protections and the like. So are you bullish about the sharing economy, or do you think is going to be somehow adjusted in the next decade?
Yeah, I'm bullish, but you see, I think there is a danger when one thinks about technology and the impact that it may have on the economy or on the society more generally. It's called technological determinism, meaning that given the technology, whatever gets invented, then we already know what the consequences are. And really, the consequences depend on how we use the technology, right? It's a political problem. It's an economic problem. It's a problem about making decisions as to how you want to use the technology. And the sharing economy, all of these platforms, can be used in a way that promotes, for example, the environment, that helps protect species, that helps arrest or slow down the problem of climate change, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, if misused, it can also lead, for example, for more people not to use public transportation and rather to use, some kind of a ride-hauling service, right? Like you mentioned one of them. So I don't want to put the spotlight on just one company. I mean, there's many of them, right? But the problem is, once again, how we use the technology. But the sharing economy is, by the way, it's not a new idea. I mean, sharing economies have existed for a long time, right? Where people share resources in the villages and so on and so forth. But these platforms enable us to do some things that without them, it would be impossible, right? And I think, in particular, Angel, they enable us to be better consumers, less wasteful, right? And therefore, I think that can have a positive impact on the world. And by the way, you mentioned John Lennon and Imagine No Possessions. Talking about intellectual property, which of course is something that is very high up on our minds. I had to pay several $1,000s just to be able to use those lines from his song as a chapter title, of course. That's the way it should be. Intellectual property, like a patent or a song or a book.
You're not singing it.
I'm not singing it. That's true, but I'm still using it.
Right? Oh my gosh.
Oh, intellectual property is important, especially in the knowledge economy, right?
Yeah. All right. So we have lots of questions coming, and but I'll ask you one more, and then my colleague will pick some of the questions that are coming through the chat. But and it's about Bitcoin. I was actually surprised how bullish you are on not just Bitcoin, but the technology underlying Bitcoin, this blockchain. And because, I've heard many sort of evangelists of how all of a sudden central banks are going to disappear and we're going to have this kind of shared currency, actually not just one, but many different currencies. At some point, in fact, someone gave me some Bitcoin, and a few years later, I realized that it was worth like $10,000 or something. I quickly sold it, and now it would have been maybe 3 times as much or something. Why? I mean, why should we pay? I mean, this is a little. I mean, I get the distributed ledger, and it allows us to keep records in a distributed way without a centralized thing. But why is that such a game changer?
Yeah. So let me clarify my thinking about this, okay? Because it's a very complex topic. So first of all, I don't think cryptocurrencies such as Bitcoin will ever become something that we use on a daily basis. And the reason is very simple, and you alluded to it, and you actually know this very well given your experience in the Federal Reserve System. So governments and central banks will never allow cryptocurrencies to prosper because they fear losing control over the money supply, over monetary policy. It's as simple as that. Having said that, I believe that there will be entrepreneurs out there who in the next few years are going to launch something different. I call it a digital token. And those digital tokens, based on the blockchain as the underlying technology, will be a bundle of things. So it will include coupons, discount coupons. It will include incentives for example, being more environmentally friendly. It will include cryptocurrency, but it will also include a way in which citizens can interact with the government, a way in which citizens can vote in elections. So it will be a bundle of things, these digital tokens. And cryptocurrency will be one element of that. I think that is the future, and it will happen. But cryptocurrencies by themselves, I think, will always be over-regulated by the government or by central banks. And by the way, there are already countries in the world that have launched these digital tokens. Estonia, the Baltic Republic in northeastern Europe, is perhaps the best example. It's a tiny country, but they've managed to launch this successfully. And the same goes for Ghana and Kenya in sub-Saharan Africa. Both of them also have been experimenting with digital tokens for the last few years to great effect. So I think the future is right around the corner, but I don't think it is a future in which Bitcoin will displace the US dollar. So if people have that in mind, I don't think that will ever happen, right? Because Bitcoin will never be allowed to do that.
Oh.
Yeah, there you go. Now I can hear you.
I think it was my fault. I had put myself on mute because there was I keep my windows open for health reasons, and there's a lot of noise sometimes outside. So we'll keep our eyes open for the future applications of blockchain, and I'll call you back in 2030, and we'll see whether your prediction was correct. So there are several questions on the channel. I'm going to pick the ones that have more likes. And one of them, I like this one very much. And how did you overcome skepticism of faculty towards online programs when
with great difficulty?
And let me add to that, which is to that question, which is, let's say this summer COVID disappears. That's a thought experiment. I know it's probably more complicated than that. But let's say we all get vaccinated, we have COVID under control. September of 2021, do universities look like they do now, or the fact that we're now learned to do this differently?
I am convinced, right? And that, I think, is the critical question. I'm convinced about two things. One is that I don't think universities are going to go back to where we were before the pandemic. Number two is they should not go back, right? I think we should take this as an opportunity to continue building on this big experience. I mean, the last few months have been a huge experiment in terms of shifting away from face-to-face instruction to platform-mediated instruction. And look, I've been teaching, and my students tell me that they actually like it. So I predict that many of our students are going to say, look, we want face-to-face instruction for certain classes, but other classes, look, give me some options. I want some online options. I'm going to be on campus, but I want to have the flexibility of doing that. And by the way, there's also another benefit. You can bring in speakers. You can bring in professors from many different parts of the world. So I also predicting, Ángel, that I think universities on different continents will collaborate to offer their students jointly taught online seminars. I think that's also going to happen to the benefit of the students. And lastly, I don't know whether this has happened at Georgia Tech, but here at Wharton and at Penn, what I've noticed in my classes is that you get more students participating over Zoom or Blue Jeans rather than in the classroom. And I think the reason seems to be that the introverts actually feel better about participating through the technology as opposed to in the classroom.
So do you think, back to the original question, I think Aselia Urmanbetova asked that question, do you think that faculty in general have gotten that message? Because before COVID, we still was like, there's no way, there's nothing as good as being in the classroom together and that relationship with the faculty, whatever. So do you think change will be easier now that we've gone through this or not?
Well, I think I'm seeing like three categories of faculty. Faculty who, like for example, myself, completely enthusiastic about this. We're embracing it. Then there's faculty who believe this is a betrayal, right? I mean, this is not what we should be doing. But I do believe that there's also another group of faculty who are saying, well, there's certain things that I would like to incorporate. into my teaching. There's certain things that I think we should do. At the end of the day, Angel, I think what we should do is offer different learning experiences for our students. Some of those learning experiences will be in the classroom. Others will be during a semester abroad in some other country. Others will be online. I think the point is, look, we have a diversity of students out there. By the way, not any longer by age, right? I mean, we're going to have students at every age, not just in their 20s, right? Primarily. So I think the more diverse offerings, right, that we make available to the students, I think the better, because then they'll be able to make decisions as to the ways in which they learn more effectively.
No, that's very interesting. And given that we don't know whether new patterns will emerge, we're better off just trying diversity of options. That's very interesting. Another question that got some likes is from Stephen, and it's about Africa and how Africa is often forgotten every time we talk about global opportunities. Clearly, you did not forget about Africa, and you spent a lot of time in the book discussing why we should pay a lot of attention to Africa. But the question goes into what should be, places like institutions like Georgia Tech, like Penn, what should we be doing in Africa?
Well, what I always tell companies when I make these presentations to them is, look, I mean, maybe you're not ready for Africa yet. But if I were you, at least I would be paying attention to what's going on over there. I would be establishing a listening post. I would be experimenting with something in those markets. I would travel to Africa every year, at least once, to try to learn about it. Because as the person who was asking the question said, we can no longer ignore Africa. For better or worse, Africa is going to change the global dynamic because it's gotten so big. See, right after World War II, Europe was bigger than Africa in terms of population, right? We could ignore Africa. If something went awfully wrong in Africa, like civil wars, it wouldn't change the global balance. But now it will. But fortunately, Africa will grow. The biggest challenge, by the way, Angel, is going to be educational. Between now and the year 2030, 450 million babies will be born in Africa. That's the projection, 450 million. We need to educate them. They don't have the schools. Maybe we can deploy technology, okay? But if we manage to, or Africa manages to educate those 450 million babies, Africa is going to be a very different place.
Got it.
Very different place.
Another person, Maria Puello Hurtado, asks about Latin America. What does your crystal ball say about Latin America over the next decade?
Yeah, so Latin America has, I think, certain peculiarities. The middle class in Latin America is also stagnant, but it's not as old as the middle class in Europe and the United States. It's only a second or third generation middle class. I think in Latin America, the biggest problem has always been the deficit in terms of education and in terms of investment in human capital. That has always been a problem. I mean, compare the situation today in Latin America to the situation in South Korea or in Taiwan, and then go back 50 years. South Korea and Taiwan were poorer than Latin America, right?
Wow.
Even than the poorest countries in Latin America. And within 3 generations, primarily through investments in human capital, now South Korea and Taiwan are 3 times richer than the average Latin American country, right? So I think that's the second thing. The third is, I think, rather obvious, is, getting the political house in order, right? I mean, just Latin America continues to be so volatile, and there's all sorts of things going on, every week in some country. So too much instability, too much volatility, and I think too little investment in human capital, unfortunately.
Thank you. Well, we're approaching the end, and I want to give you a chance to share some final thoughts, especially, but with only one condition, which is you're only allowed to share some positive, hopeful, optimistic thoughts about the future, because we have plenty of the other kind, and we need something. So what excites you? What excites you the most about the next decade?
Look, what I think I find particularly exciting is that we can do something about it to turn all of these challenges into opportunities. And if you remember, the last chapter in the book sends a very clear message. Look, the people who are going to do well in the near future are the people who are able to connect the dots, because there are so many things moving, right? Okay. So what do I do, right? And this is what I would recommend everybody who's listening to do. I try to force myself every day at night before I turn off the light to read for 15 minutes something on my phone on a topic that I know very little about. So we need to branch out. We need to understand all of these interconnections. And then the second thing I would say is, look, the human instinct, you're a psychologist as well as an engineer, Angel. I think you will relate to this. Our human instinct, our human tendency is, when we're confronted by so much change, is to either freeze and don't make any decisions, right? Or we go to the other extreme and we just completely react, and we reinvent ourselves from, the inside out. And I think we have to be disciplined as individuals and also as organizations, right? Including universities, companies, etc. Try to look for the middle ground, right? Make decisions, but never make decisions that are irreversible. This is, for me, the single most important message from the book, right? Because you want to create options for yourself as you make decisions, not run yourself into a corner, right? Mm-hmm. So you have to find that place, not just you as an individual, but also your organization. I think that's really, really important.
Got it. Well, that's a terrific place to end. And I know I had promised that if we could keep it shorter, that would be better. But this is so fascinating that I failed. But Mauro, I can't thank you. This was absolutely terrific, thought-provoking. I recommend everybody, if you haven't gotten your copy, get it. It's really an amazing, fun read. Thank you, Mauro, for spending this time with us. And thank you so much for writing this and for helping us think through about what's coming ahead. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I can't wait to welcome you in person to Atlanta and to Georgia Tech. Thank you, Mauro.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to engage in this conversation with the Georgia Tech community.
Take care.